Sometimes a movie just feels too far off base that it's clear something went horribly wrong during production. From horror flicks that bungled their timely social commentary to ones that screwed up the most basic technical aspect of lighting a damn scene, these movies all made some serious miscalculations. So let's dive in. I'm Adam, this is What Culture Horror, and here are 10 horror movies that made you say WTF were they thinking. Number 10. Evil Dies Tonight, Halloween Kills. While one can at least appreciate that David Gordon Green was trying to do something different with Halloween Ends, albeit unsuccessfully, it's much tougher to make sense of the abject mess that was the second movie in Green's trilogy, Halloween Kills. First and foremost, Kills is a treatise on the perils of mob mentality with all the nuance of a toddler's understanding of the subject. Much of the film is centered around an angry Haddonfield mob, led by Tommy Doyle, attempting to track Michael Myers down, leading to a tragic outcome when an escaped mental patient, Lance, is mistaken for Myers and ends up leaping to his death. Couple this with the mob's laughable cult-like mantra of "Evil dies tonight," and it becomes impossible to take seriously anything Green might be trying to say about the dangerous power of an angry mob. Effectively, Green could have used this movie to set the stage for the final showdown in the next movie, whilst also showing Myers slaughtering a bunch of people because, hello, this is a Halloween movie. Instead, he got totally pointlessly extra with the social commentary and embarrassed himself as a result. Number 9. Shooting the whole movie too dark, Aliens vs. Predator Requiem. Though Aliens vs. Predator Requiem delivered the R-rated gore fans expected from the first movie, it was tough to savor the presence of the iconic monsters given that they were barely visible throughout the whole thing. For all of the film's faults, and there are many, the most head-scratching decision was to shoot so much of the movie in incredibly low light conditions, enough that it's tough to make out what the hell is going on half the time. It's been theorized that filmmakers kept the light levels low in an attempt to disguise the movie's lower budget effects compared to its predecessor. Behind the scenes footage meanwhile shows cinematographer Daniel C. Pearl getting frustrated with the lighting situation on set, namely that there wasn't enough light to suitably film the xenomorph. Whatever the true cause, it's completely insane that a $40 million Hollywood movie failed to even get the cinematography right to make sure the audience can see what's going on. Number 8. The Shark's Roar, Jaws, The Revenge. The fourth Jaws movie is basically a nightmare of a film executive which somehow got greenlit. And because a sequel centered around a shark with literal revenge on its mind isn't silly enough, said shark straight up roars like a lion in the movie's climax. Yeah, that happens. As the remaining survivors battle the vengeful shark, it repeatedly leaps out of the water and lets out ridiculously over-the-top roars it couldn't possibly make in real life, because it's not a lion. It's tough to comprehend what director Joseph Sargent was going for here, because we certainly can't blame the movie's sound designers, who reportedly refused to create an original shark roar sound effect because they thought the idea was too ridiculous. As a result, the roar we hear in the final film was taken from a 1946 Tom and Jerry short called The Milky Waif, because why the hell not? In a film that feels like it was directed by an extraterrestrial who's never actually seen one before, this is the strangest creative choice of all. Number 7. Making the Blood Pink, Saw the Final Chapter. Saw the Final Chapter is basically a festival of off-base creative decisions, and perhaps none more so than making the movie's blood pink. Because the seventh and final Saw movie was released theatrically in 3D, the filmmakers had to compensate for the dimming nature of 3D glasses, and so had the dark red blood tinted bright pink during post-production to make it appear more vibrant when watched through 3D glasses. Even accepting this, the blood still looked a little off during the movie's theatrical release, but the real problem arose when Saw the Final Chapter hit home video and Lionsgate didn't bother regrading the colors for non-3D presentation. And so anyone who watches the film at home today is forced to contend with the hilarious pink blood in each and every scene, which looks more like melted down crayons than anything else. Some fans even took matters into their own hands by releasing fan edits of the film with the blood regraded to red. Number 6. Jons' unintentionally hilarious death, Damien Omen 2. Damien Omen 2 isn't a terrible sequel by any means, yet director Don Taylor nevertheless put his foot totally wrong during one infamously, unintentionally hilarious death scene midway through the movie. On the face of it, journalist Joan Hart's grisly death scene should have been absolutely traumatic, given that she has her eyes ripped out by a raven before stumbling into the nearby road and being hit by a truck. But as ever, execution is everything. While the initial eye peck is suitably horrific, aided by both solid creature effects and Shepard's blood-curdling screams, it all goes wrong once the truck comes along. When the truck hits Joan, her body is miraculously propelled into the air and towards the truck, at which point it collides with the truck bed behind the driver's cab, falls through the gap, and is then crushed by the rest of the truck as it drives over her. Between the blatant disregard of physics and unpersuasive dummy used for the scene, a seemingly nauseating sequence is turned into a genuinely laughable attempt. Basically, the technical aspects of this scene could have been a lot sharper. Number 5. Stan's heroic suicide, It Chapter 2. It Chapter 2 was a disappointing follow-up to Andy Muschietti's terrific first film, and caught a ton of flack online for its rather indelicate treatment of adult Stanley's suicide near the start of the movie. In Stephen King's original novel, Stanley kills himself out of fear of facing Pennywise again, and though It Chapter 2 implies much of the same to begin with, at film's end the situation is given a rather dubious update. The remaining Losers Club members receive letters from Stanley sent before his death, detailing that not only was he too scared to return to Derry, he knew that if any of the living losers didn't come back to fight Pennywise, it would weaken the core group and likely cause their collective deaths. And so, Stanley says, "I took the logical step, I removed myself from the board." Basically, the movie reframes Stanley's suicide as a heroic, even necessary act to ensure that the remaining losers can all unite and beat Pennywise without him holding them back. While the intent was presumably to lend added emotional weight to Stanley's death, it rubbed a lot of fans the wrong way. Even beyond its iffy framing of self-harm, it's a bit bizarre that Stanley just kills himself in the bathtub where he'll be discovered by his wife, given that the film points out that it was actually something Stanley thought through with clarity. Enough to write letters to all the losers at least. Number 4. Attack of the Bad CGI Deer, The Ring 2. Being ambitious is great and all, but there's also considerable merit to appreciating the limitations of your budget and planning your action within that scope. Director Hideo Nakata, who also helmed the original Japanese Ring movie, evidently didn't heed that advice on the second American Ring film, or its widely ridiculed deer stampede scene wouldn't have existed for our collective amusement. Midway through the movie, protagonist Rachel and her son Aiden are driving home when a horribly rendered CGI deer steps out into the road, stopping them in their tracks. The deer eventually leaves, but moments later their car is suddenly violently attacked by two more low-poly digital deer, and as they attempt to drive away, another dives right into their windscreen. As they again pull to a stop, they find themselves surrounded by literally dozens of hilariously naff-looking digital deer, before finally driving away unimpeded. Now, where to even begin with this? For one, the CGI deer looked bad even back in 2005, secondly, the scene is conceptually goofy as hell, and thirdly, it feels completely out of place in a Ring movie of all things. Number 3. Ditching the found footage style, Book of Shadows Blair Witch 2. One almost has to begrudgingly respect distributor Artisan Entertainment for rushing a second Blair Witch movie to market that wasn't also shot in the found footage style. After all, that would have been the most obvious route for a hasty follow-up, and honestly could have been a quick and easy cash cow for Artisan for at least a couple of sequels. But they instead allowed director Joe Berlinger to make Book of Shadows Blair Witch 2 in a more conventional cinematic style, due to Berlinger feeling that the original film had been parodied too much in pop culture, even with this sequel releasing barely a year afterwards. Now, Blair Witch 2 isn't a good movie for many reasons, namely its script and dialogue, but it totally beggars belief that the sequel wasn't simply a total rehash of the original, with another group of young filmmakers being terrorized in the woods. From a cynical commercial standpoint, that absolutely should have been the play, and that's exactly what finally happened in 2016 when a third Blair Witch movie was finally released, which returned to the found footage format and followed similar narrative beats to the original. Number 2. I Am Pazuzu, Exorcist 2: The Heretic. Exorcist 2: The Heretic is an abject disaster of a follow-up to the legendary horror classic, and its biggest infraction of all, verbally naming the returning demonic entity. In the original Exorcist, the demon's name is never spoken aloud, despite it being called Pazuzu in William Peter Blatty's script. This is because director William Friedkin felt that the name was too silly for a serious movie, and insisted that it never be said in the film. And as evidenced by the sequel, he was absolutely right. Midway through Exorcist 2, flashbacks show the demon possessing a child and telling Father Murren, "I am Pazuzu." Between the name and the rather comical line reading, it becomes impossible to take seriously, and even an actor as skilled as Richard Burton fails to give it gravity when he speaks it numerous times throughout the following scene. There's a common thread among many poor Exorcist sequels and spin-offs. Ignore William Friedkin's advice at your own peril. Number 1. Cutting several death scenes, Slender Man. It's not unfair to say that 2018's Slender Man movie is a goddamn atrocity. A low-effort waste of a perfectly good idea for a film to adapt the iconic internet creepypasta story into a full-blown cinematic scarefest. Beyond the cardboard characters and generally sloppy writing throughout, its biggest failure lies in ultimately leaving several character deaths, that is, what everyone was actually paying to see, on the cutting room floor. The trailer memorably showed high schooler Chloe stabbing herself in the face with a scalpel, and fellow student Tom falling from a roof, yet neither of these scenes ended up in the final cut. As it turned out, Sony apparently panicked during post-production due to the Slender Man stabbing case taking place at the time, where two 12-year-old girls stabbed their friend 19 times in an alleged attempt to appease the fictional entity. And so, much of the violent content was pulled from the movie during editing, including the aforementioned death scenes, causing both Chloe and Tom to just suddenly disappear out of the movie without explanation. Another character, Allison, similarly exits the movie abruptly, despite the trailers showing far more footage of her, suggesting she too was probably supposed to be killed by the creature. Now, sensitivity is one thing, but shouldn't this be something to consider before putting a Slender Man film into production? Wringing your hands over it once the thing is in the can is something else, and then releasing it with the few scenes people actually wanted to see being removed, just poor decision making all around here, honestly. And there we have it, my fellow horror movie fans. 10 horror movies that made you say, WTF were they thinking? But please do let us know down in the comments of any of the horror movies that have made you ask the same question. If you want to follow me on socials, I am at Strawn87 across all social media. Thank you for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and until next time, take care.